So Fox Business alert President Trump announcing new economic sanctions against Turkey, along with increased tariffs following its invasion of Syria. The commander-in-chief also saying U.S. troops coming out of Syria will now redeploy and, quote, remain in the region to continue to disrupt remnants of ISIS. All that information just in as we go to Fox News correspondent Steve Harrigan, who's reporting from northeastern Syria. He has the latest on the ground.
What began as a military operation against what Turkey calls terrorists has now evolved into something perhaps much bigger, much more dangerous, a war between Turkey, a NATO member, and Syria, a country backed by Russia. Kurdish officials wasted little time in finding a new partner after the withdrawal of U.S. forces, which they described as a stab in the back. Syrian government troops under Bashar al-Assad reached the front lines within hours of the deal, a welcome sight to many Kurds on the ground.
Thank God for the return of our army. Thank God for the return of the Syrian Arab army.
The fighting is brutal. Arab militia, backed by Turkey, have been accused of atrocities, executing Kurdish prisoners on the battlefield, pulling a female Kurdish political leader from her car and shooting her in the head. A convoy containing armed men, civilians, and journalists was bombed near the front line, killing 9. Dozens of civilians on both sides of the border have been killed by mortar shells exploding into homes. There is a rage here among civilians that no one is doing anything to save them.
Where is the United Nations? Let them come to see the blood of our children on the floor. Why don't they show up? Our children are gone, our girls are gone, and our strength is gone.
Several world leaders have warned that the conflict could lead to a resurgence of the Islamic State in the region. The Kurds have been in charge of prisons housing ISIS combatants and family members in Syria. Over the past 3 days, at least 2 mass escapes have been attempted at these facilities. Civilians are also looking for an escape from fighting that's come to their doorstep. More than 130,000 people are on the move, trying to get away from the fighting any way they can. And that number has gone up each day. Back to you.
Steve Harrigan reporting from Syria for us. Lauren.
All right, let's discuss. Chris Harmer is a retired Navy commander. He joins us now. Chris, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Moments ago, the president said he will soon issue an executive order with sanctions on Turkey, a NATO member, raising steel tariffs back to 50%, putting a $100 billion trade deal on hold, and some troops will remain in the region. But Chris, does that do anything to change the situation that has gotten so bad in such a fast time on the ground?
It will have, as a practical matter, absolutely no impact at all. I grew up out west, and at the risk of using a Western euphemism, this is like closing the barn door after the horses have already gotten out. Turkey has already invaded Syria. The Kurds have already switched their allegiance from being a proxy of the United States to align with Bashar al-Assad. ISIS is regenerating. A lot of those ISIS prisoners, one way or another, they're either going to be released or break out. This is a tragedy across the board, and it was such a preventable tragedy. It's both a humanitarian tragedy and a national security tragedy for us. There is no way to put shine on this.
Can you quantify how severe ISIS rising could be now, and also the rise of Russia in the region?
Well, it's a good question. I wish I had discrete numbers. Most of our analysts, most of the estimates put that the Kurdish prisoners, they were holding ISIS prisoners around 10,000. My impression is that's a bit on the high side. I think we're probably closer to 6,000 to 8,000 ISIS fighters that were being held by Kurds. But virtually all of those ISIS fighters are going to be released one way or the other. The Kurds don't have the manpower to simultaneously guard these ISIS prisoners and fight against the Turkish invasion. And when it comes time to, they've got to make a decision between guarding prisoners or protecting their women and children. They're going to protect their civilian population. Anybody would do that. I'd do the same thing. So inevitably, you're going to see, at a minimum, several thousand ISIS fighters will be released over the next week or escape, call it what you want, distinction without a difference, but they are going to be back in the battlefield very shortly. That's completely the fault of our policy change here.
What did Europe do with all of this? Because they helped protect those safe zones in northern Syria. And now, I mean, for Europe, as these refugees flee, this is another refugee crisis for that continent.
Yeah, so I mean, continental Europe will do what it's been doing for the last 70 years, look to the United States primarily and to the United Kingdom secondarily for help. Look, I'm not a Europe basher. There's plenty of European allies who try to do the best they can. But by and large, Europe is following the lead of the United States within the context of NATO. They really don't have much of a choice. Now they've got a serious problem that they're completely unprepared for, and they're looking to the United States for leadership, and instead what they're getting is abdication. So I think what's going to happen is the European Union, rather than NATO, is going to take the lead on crafting European domestic policy in response to this, but I don't know what they can really do. Unless they know exactly which countries these ISIS fighters came from and can get hands on them quickly and repatriate them back to their home country for securing in prisons, I just don't see any other possibility than these guys are going to leak back on their own surreptitiously and then be a force in waiting for ISIS to conduct attacks back in Europe again.
Chris, would the U.S. then be part of those EU negotiations, or can we not be trusted as a reliable ally these days?
Another great question. My assumption here is the European Union is going to go alone on this. They weren't notified by us that we were changing this. This was, by all accounts, a unilateral decision by President Trump. So since we did not negotiate this or discuss this or give our European allies a heads up, my guess is they're going to go it alone on crafting their response to it. They're going to give us a heads up, but it's going to be them making the decision and them informing us what they are doing.
10 seconds, Chris. Do you think this one-on-one diplomacy by President Trump helps him come 2020 with voters?
I'm not a political analyst. I'm a strategic analyst, so I'll simply say strategically it's a disaster.
Chris Harmer, thank you for the time.